Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's program titled Cultural Competence in Mental Health Care. I'm Tom Valentino, Senior Editor for the Institute for the Advancement of Behavioral Health Care. Today's program is sponsored by Foundations Recovery Network and Retreat Premier Addiction Treatment Centers. Thank you to our sponsors and to our audience for giving us your time and attention today. Before we get started, we have a few details we'd like to go over. To submit a question for our presenter, please use the Q&A area below the slides at any time. You do not have to wait until the end of the program to ask a question. If you are having technical issues, please click the Test Your Connection button below the video window to chat with support. And finally, to download a copy of the presentation, please click the link in the Resources tab to the right of your slides. Special note about CE credit: to get your CE, you must watch the program all the way through the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. At the end, do not leave the web page. The site will automatically redirect you to a survey, and the survey must be completed in order to generate your CE certificate. For those watching in a group, please download the group submission guide in the Resources tab and follow the instructions provided. Please note CE credit is not available for the archived webinar. It is only available for the live event here today on April 24th, 2018. Finally, for those of you who tweet, please tweet along with us today using our hashtag IABHCLiveWebinar. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Vanina Hochman. Vanina is a licensed marriage and family therapist who also serves a role as a community relations representative for Retreat Premier Addiction Treatment Centers. Vanina comes from a multicultural background and is bilingual, which has become a tool in her success to treat and to access a diverse population in the Miami area. She comes most recently from working in private practice with a large focus on substance abuse treatment and recovery. Thank you, Vanina, for taking the time to speak with us today. And with that, the audience is yours.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you, everybody, for joining me. Good afternoon. Like Tom said, my name is Vanina Hochman, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I wanted to welcome everybody, and I will be talking about cultural competence in mental health care today. I wanted to start off by talking a little bit about exactly what do we mean by saying culture. When we talk about culture, exactly what are we talking about? I think culture, to me, is really providing a sense of where people feel like they belong. Culture provides people with ways to make sense out of life. It aids in imposing meaning on thoughts, behaviors, and events, and allowing us to make assumptions about life and how it ought to be led. All people are cultural beings, and culture really influences all people's norms, values, and behaviors. With that said, everyone has a culture. Whether you think that you have lived here all your life, meaning the United States, and you are an American, or you come from a different background, or you moved here at a young age, or you moved here at an older age, you come from your own culture, and you're influenced by that culture. And how that culture has influenced you has made you understand your surroundings and your context. And because of that, you have developed ways of thinking about things. And because of culture, we have become and are inclined to be ethnocentric. And when you think about being ethnocentric, you might put a negative connotation to that, and that's not what I mean by that. I just mean, because you think ethnocentric and you think egocentric, and I'm not talking about that for everybody that's thinking very Freudian right now. I'm thinking about just universally, like the phenomenon of ethnocentrism. It just occurs when all behaviors and actions are judged according to the standards of one's own culture. And that just normally comes to us because it's the way that we're raised. So we're going to talk a little bit how that influences us as practitioners and when we are treating patients. So when individuals come from one culture, they find themselves living in a different culture and in a different cultural context. They have to find ways to either integrate or assimilate or live in that culture separately, but somehow try to fit in, right? So you have people that have mental health illnesses that are from one culture and are trying to get services. And then you have us as practitioners that are also from another culture trying to provide the services. So let's talk about the learning objectives for today. So we're going to discuss patient-centered philosophies and individualized care. That's more about the organization that we work for and how they are cultural competent. Then we're going to list considerations in relation to cultural diversity and cultural competency affecting healthcare and substance use disorder treatment. And we're going to discuss the key aspects of cultural competency. I want to talk to you a little bit about myself. I come from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I moved here at the age of 10. I didn't speak one word of English when I moved here. I spoke only Spanish. And it was a challenge to come and to integrate into a completely different culture, completely different language. And it was a learning experience for me, something that I found later on in life. It was actually that brought some trauma into my life. But I was able to process that, and it was through the help of a very transitional type of educational system, because my parents were able to find a bilingual school to put me in when I first started school here in the 5th grade. And through a really good support system and having some family here, that I was able to integrate and assimilate into the culture here in the United States, coming from Argentina. Having that experience, I think, has helped me understand when I treat people from other cultures as well. So it gives me a little bit of an advantage when I talk about this. And if you guys have any questions regarding that, I will be more than happy to answer that also at the end. Okay, so let's move on a little bit over here. Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit about patient-centered care. So when I talk about patient-centered care, we're talking about more of an organizational view of patient-centered care. For example, I work for Retreat Premier Addiction Treatment Centers, and we really value patient-centered care, individualized care. And what I mean by that is that we look at every single patient as an individual, and we will customize their treatment plan according to what they need. And to take into consideration their culture is something that is super important to us. Currently, I think the management of mental health and mental health illnesses in, diverse communities is a little bit lacking in regard to cultural awareness and sensitivity. And we have to really be aware, and it's really important to understand the definition of mental health and mental illness and how it's being used in other countries and in other cultures. And it's that would help us, I think, in how we provide the care. And using a more holistic approach to mental health and incorporating those factors is a better way to adjust, and it gives you a greater sense of well-being for an individual in a group. And there are many factors to consider when you are dealing with patients. So for patient-centered care services, we're going to want to solicit and respect the patient's values and preferences and needs. We want to empower patients through information and education, incorporate nutritional, cultural, and nurturing aspects of food, and ensure emotional and spiritual support, and encourage involvement of family and friends. Now, this sometimes doesn't really have to do with culture or ethnicity or background. This just has to do with an organization that takes pride in making sure that their care is not cookie cutter, that their care is individualized. But having this type of care, does that mean that you're culturally sensitive? Does that mean that there isn't bias when you are treating patients? I think like healthcare in general, culture-sensitive care is based on the principles of knowledge, mutual respect, and really negotiation. And what I mean by that is listening to what the patient needs, and if they are asking for something that you don't provide, it's helping meet the needs of the patient based on what they're asking for, and that's just based on just listening. So we as practitioners, when we come with some type of ethnocentric views, we might have to adjust our attitudes and our feelings about clients and about their attitudes and about our feelings towards them, and that will create better synergy, and that will result in a just better clinical setting and better clinical care for our patients. Okay, so I said the word bias before, and what I was talking about was something called unconscious bias. So I don't necessarily mean that anybody purposely has a bias towards a certain ethnicity or a certain culture. But because of the way that we were raised by our families, our brains unconsciously make decisions of what feels safe, likable, valuable, and competent. And we make decisions largely in a way that is designed to confirm beliefs that we already have. And we are just programmed to do that as humans. It's not something that we do maliciously. It's not something that we do on purpose. It's something that we just have where we perceive others and perceive ourselves. And those things, those beliefs, influence the way that we treat others. And the only way that you know whether you're having some of these biases is really just to look within yourself, to check yourself, to ask yourself questions. As a clinician, you always want to periodically anyway kind of take a almost like an inventory of am I following the steps that I'm supposed to follow? Am I treating everyone the way that I'm supposed to treat people? Am I being open-minded? Am I asking open-ended questions? And those things are just things that we're supposed to be doing with all of our patients, all of our clients, not just when we're thinking about cultural competency. So I have a little exercise for you guys to do. So if you were to see someone come into your office, or if you saw a supervisor, or if you saw a coworker, or if you saw a patient come into your office or walk around your halls, and they were wearing one of these buttons, what would your reaction be? Would it change your opinion of the person? Would you engage in conversation if they approach you? What if it was a patient of yours? Would you treat them differently? Would you make assumptions about them before speaking to them? What if it was a family member of a patient that you were treating? Once again, would you make an assumption? And this is part of that almost unconscious bias, right? It's you automatically, without really any malintent, it's kind of coming up with a conclusion or making an assumption of something based on something that you saw or something that you heard, or something that you see, because you think that person stands for something because they're wearing a button. So pushing buttons, or can buttons push you, is the title of the slide, which I thought was kind of funny. So just ask yourself those types of questions. This is something, it's just like an exercise, right? It's what kind of things are you being tested on? I think we get tested by our patients every day based on our biases. And how judgmental are we? If you look at the person's context, how they grew up, where they grew up, how they were raised, the experiences that they went through, their behaviors, their thoughts, their education, all those things make sense. So we really can't judge anybody. And this is part of where that comes from. Okay, so let's define what we're talking about here. So defining cultural competence. And this is from Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. This is their definition. Cultural competence describes the ability of an individual or organization to interact effectively with people of different cultures. To produce positive change, prevention practitioners must understand the cultural context of their target community and have the willingness and skills to work within this context. This means drawing on community-based values, traditions, and customs, and working with knowledgeable persons of and from the community to plan, implement, and evaluate prevention activities. How is this important in our field? Why is this so important in our field? Especially here, I think, in South Florida specifically, and I know what we see at retreat, which is a melting pot of cultures, really. We want to produce positive change. We want to target communities, and we want to have services and values and traditions, and open our services to everybody. The diseases that we deal with don't discriminate, right? They affect all cultures. And we want to be able to serve everybody. So it is so important to be able to serve all the populations and to be able to be competent in serving them. And for that, we have to be aware of how to do that as an organization and as practitioners. So to achieve that, we must achieve cultural competency. And cultural competency acknowledges that while people develop a more or less automatic depth of understanding of the subject positions and cultures into which we are born and socialized, achieving something like the depth of understanding of other object positions and other cultures is far more difficult, but not impossible. The process of gaining depth of understanding of subject positions and cultures other than your own is the process of gaining various degrees of cultural competency. Now, the question is, how do we get there? So let's talk about a little bit about that. How do we get there? For organizations, I'm going to touch on that a little bit first. How do we get there as an organization to become cultural competent? And then how do we get there as a practitioner? And then how does this affect different cultures? Okay. So I want to talk to you a little bit, I'm going to touch the cultural competence continuum, and this is more for you to bring back to maybe your organization and think about where you are now and where you could be. So there is such a thing as the cultural competence continuum, and the characteristics that you see here in this continuum are not meant to be defined as a system or organization, really. Rather, they allow system to gauge where they are and to plan for positive movement and growth to achieve cultural competency and proficiency, which is really what it's always the goal is to move more towards proficiency. The continuum is dynamic and not intended to be viewed in a linear manner. So systems and organizations may be at different stages and at different times with different populations and cultural groups. And it's not limited to the arrival at cultural competence and proficiency. There's always room for continual growth. So I don't think you're ever at like, okay, we're there. We've achieved cultural competence and there's nothing else we can do. There's always room for growth. It's really what it is. So if you are at cultural incapacity, some of the characteristics of that could include things as systemic biases and practices that may result in discrimination in hiring and promotion, some disproportionate allocation of resources that may benefit one cultural group versus another, and then maybe some like messages that some cultural groups may be valued more than others or welcomed more than others, and lower expectations for some cultural, ethnic, or racial groups. That's if you're in capacity. Cultural blindness, some of those characteristics may include policies that end personnel who encourage assimilation, approaches in the delivery of services and supports that ignore cultural strengths, institutional attitudes that blame consumers, individuals, or family for their circumstances, little value placed on training and resources development that facilitate cultural and linguistic competence, and then lack of diversity in personnel, and few structures and resources dedicated to acquiring cultural knowledge. So not having a lot of staff that are bilingual and not having trainings on cultural competence and things that help the staff to achieve the ultimate goal. Then there's cultural pre-competence. Characteristics of this could include that the system expressly values the delivery of high-quality services and supports culturally and linguistically diverse populations. It's committed to human and civil rights, hiring practices that support a diverse workforce, and the capacity to conduct asset and needs assessments within diverse communities. And they put in efforts to improve service delivery, usually for specific racial, ethnic, or cultural groups. And they have representation in their staff from various cultural groups. And then there is cultural competence, which is the goal. And systems and organizations that really exemplify cultural competence demonstrate an acceptance and respect for cultural differences, and they create a mission statement that articulates principles, rationale, and values for cultural and linguistic competence in all aspects of the organization. They also implement specific policies and procedures that integrate cultural and linguistic competence into each core function of the organization. They adapt evidence-based practices into their treatment. They develop structures and strategies to ensure consumer and community participation in the planning, delivery, and evaluation of its core function. They implement policies and procedures to recruit, hire, and maintain a diverse and culturally and linguistically competent workforce. And they provide support, professional development, and incentives for the improvement of cultural and linguistic competence for the staff. And they dedicate resources for both individual and organizational self-assessment and cultural and linguistic competence. And they develop the capacity to collect and analyze data using variables that have meaningful impact on cultural and linguistically diverse groups. That's a lot, I understand, but really practicing these principles of all cultural competence keys, of all these keys, will make an organization really stand out when it comes to being proficient. I hope that kind of goes over what it looks like to have an organization that is cultural competent. But I wanted to really move on to a practitioner as an individual. If you are either not in as part of an organization, or even if you are part of an organization but you are a practitioner, this is what you want to focus on. Understanding the concept of culture and how it can influence human influences, including emotions generated by intercultural interactions. You want to demonstrate a willingness to explore the above from the perspective of people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and demonstrate the ability to identify culturally appropriate strategies to working with people from different backgrounds. Okay. I want to move on because I am actually running out of time already. I think I could spend 3 hours on this. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about substance use disorder and ethnicity. Substance use disorders occur, and I don't know if I want to spend a lot of time on this, but when the recurrent use of alcohol and drugs causes clinically and functionally significant impairment, and I think don't have to go over the DSM-5 diagnosis, but what I do want to say is that substance use disorder does not discriminate between any culture, between young and old, rich or poor, black or white, men and women. It just affects everyone all over the world, and its consequences are so destructive and so harmful. And here in the United States, where we have such a melting pot of cultures, we have to learn how to treat them in our centers and be sensitive to other cultures so we can provide those services. I want to give you some statistics from the World Health Organization. They estimate that 155 to 250 million people a year, which is 3 to 5% of the population, age 15 to 64, use illicit substances, have used illicit substances in the previous year. Of these, between 16 and 38 million are considered problem drug users. Cannabis, amphetamines, and opiates are the most popular drugs used. Also, alcohol is consumed by nearly 12% of the world's population in high-risk locations on a weekly basis, according to them. The report revealed that the highest level of alcohol consumption is found in developed countries such as Europe, America, and Australia. And so that just shows that really the problem is all over the world. And America is right up there in the top of the chart. We have here a little bit of a chart. It's just what it shows you where it can affect. It's the dimensions of diversity. It's a circle chart. You see I have sexual orientation, age, mental, physical abilities and characteristics, ethnicity, gender, race. These are some of the things that we can that are more easily seen. You're more easily informed. These are things that you are almost able to tell right away. You get these from the psychosocial assessment when you meet with a person. But then, as you see from the second chart, when we really explore the dynamics of diversity, we can see that it goes beyond just really the inner circle. When we look at these dimensions of diversity outside of the inner circle, we see that things that affect us every day are not necessarily acknowledged as diversity dynamics. And in the case of cultural competency, these dimensions in combination with those of the inner circle present a variety of dynamics that affect the individual and the organization. So we have to think about the dimensions of diversity within the organization, and then also think about how we can create better solutions and challenges and how problems can arise when you think about the dynamics within each dimension. So there is education, political affiliation, economic status, communication style, work style, marital status. And all these things can be found out through open-ended questions, through really getting to know the patient. And you can't make assumptions just based on race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. There are so many other things that go into diversity. Of course, culture and language influence many, many other things as well. They They influence our health, healing, and wellness belief systems, our illness, disease, and how the causes are perceived, how healthcare treatment is sought and attitudes towards providers, and how it's impacting treatment, and how the delivery of health and care services by providers who may compromise access for patients from other cultures due to lack of diagnosis. I'm going to talk a little bit about different cultures. I'm going to start with Hispanic, and I'm going to use some personal examples from that. And I can tell you because my family is Hispanic, so I relate to a lot of things. Latinos, and there's a lot of that in Miami, are no different when it comes to mental health conditions when compared to the rest of the population. And we really have ways of wanting to get help. However, the way that we perceive things sometimes is different and not understood by practitioners. So preventative care might not be practiced a lot of the time. In Hispanic historical cultural beliefs, illness is God's will and recovery is in his hands. A lot of it is based on religion. A lot of it is based on temperature, hot versus cold. Expressiveness of pain is culturally acceptable. You're allowed to express your pain. It doesn't mean that you have to keep it all in. Sometimes being overweight is healthy. These are just examples of how it might differ from things of the American culture. That's really what I wanted to highlight, and how things that in the American culture, it might be seen different. And when we are being given care, it might contradict what the care that we might be given. And specifically when it comes to mental health, the most common mental health disorders among Latinos are generalized anxiety disorder, major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and alcoholism. And while Latino communities show similar susceptibility to mental illness as the general population, unfortunately, we experience disparities in access to treatment and in the quality of treatment we receive. This inequality puts us at a higher risk for more severe persistence of the mental health conditions. That's just because we don't have access to the care that we require. I wanted to also highlight things in other cultures. I have some things here in the Asian American, some of their historical beliefs when it comes to harmony, expressed in balance of hot and cold, for example. Some of their practices when it comes to it's more of an Eastern medicine. Also some Asian Indian historical beliefs. I have some that are just highlighted here and how they differ from American. You have them highlighted here. I'm not going to go into them in detail right now because I want to move on. So I only have 10 minutes to go, okay? Because I really wanted to focus on this. Some of the barriers to treatment and some of the issues that we need to consider. Okay, so why don't sometimes people from the Hispanic cultures or other cultures, why don't we go to search for treatment? Or why do we feel like we don't have the correct treatment? First of all, what I have found is that we have lack of information and misunderstanding about mental health. We also have concerns about privacy, and we like to keep things within the family. And so we feel that if we go outside of the family, it's lack of privacy. Major language barriers. There is not a lot of treatment centers, at least I know when it comes to substance abuse and mental health, that have Spanish-speaking staff. Lack of health insurance. We have a lot of an indigent population. Misdiagnosis. Legal status is a big one because they are afraid that if they search for services or if they try to get services, they will be sent to immigration. I know Hispanic, Latinos, and a lot of people that seek Eastern medicine as well will search for natural medicine and home remedies before going to treatment centers. And a lot also just rely on faith and spirituality. They really believe God will heal them. And if that helps them through their recovery, that's good, but medically, treatment is needed as well. Okay. I wanted to give you some tools because that's really what we're here for. This is the LEARN model, and it just gives you some tools on how to approach a client. LEARN stands for listen, explain, acknowledge, recommend, and negotiate. So listen to the patient's perception of the problem. The key there is just listen. Listen to what they are telling you. And then explain back to them your perception of the problem and see if you're really understanding what they are telling you. Acknowledge and discuss differences and similarities. When you acknowledge and you let them know that you are validating their views, their concerns, it shows them that you have listened, that you are understanding what they are telling you. And when you're discussing the differences and similarities, it also lets them know that you are understanding what they're telling you. Recommend treatment and negotiate treatment. So you're giving them a recommendation, and then the negotiation comes from them letting you know what their limits are, what their needs are, and by negotiating, you are respecting their boundaries and you are respecting what they need, and that way you are being sensitive to their needs, whether it's because of cultural concerns or any other type of concerns. You're making that treatment plan very individualized. I hope that helps a little bit. So skills and characteristics of cultural competency. This is big to understand how we, as practitioners, what skills we need to be cultural competent. And I think that these are skills that all practitioners should have. So we want to be respectful to each other, to your patients, respectful to your client, respectful to staff as well, of course. Willingness to share, risk exchange, and explore. You want to be open to each other's differences. Understand the power of action and words. the ability to recognize learning opportunities, possessing knowledge of oneself, that is very big, and having an attitude that different is okay or interesting, and commitment and co-responsibility. So I think what's most important is to learn about yourself. We are not taught in school about really cultural competence. Maybe you take one course at the end, your last semester at the end of school, and traditional models of training don't really focus much on learning on how to adapt one's skills to different populations. So really you have to do your own work on cultural competence and integrate it into your own practice. I think it's really important to learn about yourself, learn about your own historical roots, beliefs, and values. It's important to do some self-assessment. Think about what your own biases are, and be open-minded and find out about other cultures. Be curious, learn about different cultures. You could take trainings or read books or watch documentaries. It would be great if you were to immerse yourself in other cultures, especially if you're dealing specifically, if you're living in an area where there is a lot of one certain culture. It would be great to learn another language, of course, always. But it's good to interact with a diverse group. And it's really important to maybe volunteer and have social interactions with other diverse groups. Put yourself in social situations where you're not the only one from your cultural group. Maybe attend diversity-focused conferences, or you can get formal training on diversity-related research. And then, lobby your department. If you feel that your program isn't giving you the training that you need, push your facility, push your organization to do better, to give you more training, to give you more skills. And push for those skills. Use inclusive language. Don't make assumptions. Learn about more cultures. Use active listening. Learn on why you do what you do and explain what you do and why. And approach with engagement, openness, and the willing to try. I'm running a little bit out of time, but you guys have all my slides. Just remember that achieving cultural competence is a process. It's not an endpoint. There's not really a recipe. It's a continuum. Like we said, it's fluid. You want to achieve certain goals, but it's a process. Continue to do the self-assessment and continue to push for cultural competence in your organizations and for yourself as practitioners. Sorry that I am rushing through the last few slides, but you guys can get a copy of these. Like I said before, learn about yourself. And cultural competence is a lifelong project. competence with one group doesn't mean that you're competent with another. You have to keep finding ways to expand your learning, and I just think there's nothing more exciting than that, than continue to learn. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, I am here. You can always email me, and I think that wraps it up. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Vanina. That was a very informative presentation. Before we get into the Q&A portion of the event, I would like to hand things over to Christy Krisman from Foundations for a few words from our sponsors.
Thank you, Tom. The Heroes in Recovery 6K Virtual Race Series, powered by Foundations Recovery Network, encourages participants to run to celebrate their own recovery, walk to remember a loved one they lost to addiction, or just be part of the movement. One of the many benefits of a virtual race is that you can run or walk anytime, anywhere. Virtual races eliminate everything that may keep you from running a race in person, from early morning alarms to inclement race day weather and long registration lines. Create a team to support one of our many charity beneficiaries and invite your friends and family to join you. No matter where your finish line is, your virtual participation at home makes a tangible difference all over the country. To learn more and to register, visit heroes6k.com. Thank you very much, and back to you.
All right, thanks, Christy. We've already had some questions coming in from our audience. However, we would also like to remind you that you can use the Q&A area below the slides to submit a question at any time. And also, to download a copy of the slides, please click the Resources tab to the right of the presentation window. All right, let's get into some questions here. We had a couple of folks asking, Vanina, if you could expand a little bit on the hot and cold principles and what that means.
Oh, yes. In the Latin culture they're talking about when I spoke about that?
Yes.
Okay. So that's funny that they asked about that. Okay, can I go back to that slide? Yes? Is that possible?
I believe we can do that, and I think we're going back now.
Hold on. Okay, I'm going. Oh. Sorry, this is taking me a second. Okay. So, and I think this is for a lot of different cultures, but I can tell you from personal, from growing up in my family. So in Hispanic cultures, when you are feeling hot, like temperature, it's just for temperature. If you're feeling hot, or if you're in hot environments, or if you're feeling cold in cold environments, so the temperature in your body is cold, it means that you have a certain ailment or that you might develop a certain ailment. So, for example, when I was young, if I washed my hair and my hair was wet, and my grandmother used to say, do not go outside with your hair wet. You're going to catch a cold because your body will get cold and you'll get pneumonia. Like these were her thoughts. Or if when, for example, also when I became pregnant, I was pregnant with twins, and hormonally, right, I guess the temperature in your body rises. And my grandmother also, it's funny how your grandmother is the one that carries those kind of traditional thoughts from the culture, right? My grandmother would say, well, you're going to get hot flashes because you're pregnant, and that means that the babies are healthy. So they will tie your well-being to temperatures in your body. And when it comes to diseases or catching sometimes a disease, it might have nothing to do with it, because usually if you catch a cold, it's most likely because you have a virus, right? Like you caught a germ or anything like that. It doesn't have anything to do with you sitting under an air conditioning vent. But it's these like old wives' tales, basically, that come from historical, cultural beliefs. That's what I was coming to. But they really do believe these things.
All right. Yeah, definitely. Let's jump into another question here with a few minutes we've got left. What would your directives be to an organization that has difficulty recruiting and retaining a culturally diverse workforce?
Recommendations. I would try to look deeply into the system of their hiring process, I guess, and see what systems they have in place. And can you repeat the question? If they're having an issue hiring or keeping them on staff?
Yeah, it was difficulty both recruiting and retaining a culturally diverse workforce.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to look at the hiring process. You have to look at where the jobs are being posted. The way that you have to hire is the same way that I think you see anybody, which is with open mind, and you have to see what processes and what or the organization, what kind of steps you have in place, and look at the systems and why it's not happening. I think there has to be a little bit of a study of why you're having issues recruiting and keeping those people on staff to then find solutions.
All right. Well, I think that is going to be just about all the time that we have for questions for today. We do have some final instructions regarding CE credit. Do not leave this page. Please continue to stay on the platform, and the site's going to automatically redirect you to a survey. That survey must be completed in order to generate your CE certificate. For those watching in a group, as a reminder, please download the group submission guide in the Resources tab to the right of the slides and follow the instructions provided. Please note that CE credit is not available for the archived webinar. It's only available for the live event on April 24th, 2018. If you enjoyed today's program, please join us on May 29th for Caring for Our Veterans, presented by Dr. Joseph Troncalli. The link to register is in the Resources tab to the right of your presentation window. I want to thank Vanina Hochman once again for an excellent presentation. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, Foundations Recovery Network and Retreat, for making today's program possible. Finally, thank you to those of you in our audience for participating today. We hope you'll join us in the future for another IABHC webinar. This concludes today's presentation. Have a great day.